Well, I want to talk about how we identify plants using some identification keys. Um, so this key is a traditional idea, and I'm going to use three different ones, and we'll just look at the same example for Ponderosa pine. Now, to identify any plant, you start with the plant. It may seem obvious, but make some really good observations first. So this one, obviously we can see it is a tree, and it's a big tree, and you don't have to know much to realize, hey, that's a conifer. That's some sort of pine tree or something like a pine tree. Off to a good start. So we have some cones. These are pretty good size cones. Really long needles, it looks like. Hard for you to get a perspective from here on how long they are, but that would be something good to note. And then the other thing to know is that the needles come in groups of three. When you look down at the base and you look at the needles coming out, you'll see that they're in groups of three. So probably some key information to take down there. We never know exactly what the identification guides are going to ask of us, but those are some real common ones that I could point out. So let's start with a key that I made for the conifers of the Yakima Valley College campus. All keys work about the same. They have these numbered pairs. Usually there's two. If it's a dichotomous key, there's some keys with three, maybe even more choices, but usually it's two. And you're going to read each of those choices. They're numbered the same. They have slightly different ways of working it, but you start with pair number one, and then you move to pair number two, and then kind of go where it tells you. When you get to the end of the line, you have a couple of choices. So for pair one, either you're going to go on to choice two, or you're going to go on to choice nine. And you stop when you reach your destination, which is some sort of name. All right, well, let's take the information we know about the Ponderosa pine. We already know the name, so we've kind of cheated, but who cares? All right, let's start with pair one. Leaves are needle-like, straight and narrow. Well, that sounds pretty good. Here I've added that these are pines and firs, and we already know it's a pine, so this is looking good. But don't just assume, hey, that looks great, and move on. Read the next one. Leaves are scale-like. I don't know what scale-like means, but let's read on. Flattened against and concealing the stem. That didn't really seem to fit. Cones less than an inch long. No, that thing was fist size. Definitely not this choice. So we got a really clear choice. We are going to go on then to number two because the description that fit was the one for 1A. All right, so on to choice number two. Leaves appear singly on the stem, not in groups, or leaves, the needles, appear in groups, fascicles. Yeah, they're in groups. Remember I said they're in groups of three. So we're going to go on to pair number seven, and that'll be in the next slide. All right, so here we have pair seven, and in between that we have pair 8. We'll see if we need to go to that. If 7A applies, then we're going to go on to choice 8. You're probably already looking ahead, and you see Ponderosa pine down here. So it's kind of nice this first go around to know your destination. Kind of like driving to some place rather than just taking off and trying to find it. So let's go ahead and look through it. Needles about 1 inch long. Now those seem a lot bigger. Clustered on small branches appearing bunched together, but actually single needles. I don't know, maybe on campus they're twisted or specimen. Well, that wasn't a campus specimen, so maybe that doesn't really apply, but that 1 inch long, that doesn't seem good. Needles over 1 inch long. This is looking good. Clustered in groups. Yep, they're in groups of 3, etc. So got it. It is a pine in the genus Pinus. And down below, rather than make a key and be really kind of tedious, I've just listed the pines on campus. These have needles in groups of 2, these in groups of 3 or 5. And so we can look at it and say, yep, it's in 3s. These are tall trees. Needles are in groups of 3. Ponderosa pine it is. Great. So there we go. We went through our first key. Well, next let's try the key in the plants of the inland northwest. There's a key specifically to the trees in that book. It's obviously not every tree in the northwest, but the common ones. And you can see it's set up pretty similar. It's not a great image, but you might want to follow along in your book. So they have it set up pretty similar. We have couplet 1A, 1B, trees with broad leaves, flowers and fruits and catkins. That doesn't sound right. Trees with needles or scale-like leaves. Yep, it had needles, so I'm going to go with that one. And that means that we're going to go on to, oh, did I read it wrong? Yep. Okay, we're going to go on to choice number 5. So let's go on to couplet 5 right here. Trees with scale-like leaves concealing the twigs. That looks similar to that other one. And trees with needles. Definitely in needles. All right, so that means I go on to number 7. Well, look at these guys here. Needles in clusters of 15 or more in short shoots. Deciduous. That doesn't sound right. Needles single or in bundles of 2, 3, or 5 in evergreen. Yep, I remember that bundles of 3, and that pine tree certainly looked evergreen. So let's go with that one. On to choice number 9. And here I have cut off the other 9B down below, but needles in bundles of 2, 3, or 5, we know that that's it. Let me clear that out. And so we're going to go on to choice 10. And this, you can see, goes quite a bit. It just keeps going in and further and getting more and more detailed each time. But here we see our goal going on to couplet 10, needles in bundles of 3, 10 to 20 centimeters long. Yep, that sounds about right. It's not in bundles of 2 or 5, so Ponderosa pine it is. There we go. Similar process, slightly different wording, but you can see how you really need to know something about the plant and keep that in mind as you go through this. Especially once you've left the area, if you're trying to figure out, hey, what was that plant we saw on the hike? Unless you had a lot of detail written down about it, it'd be kind of hard to tell. So it's easiest if you have the plant in front of you or have written down some details about it. All right, final one. I think you're going to like this one. Random access keys. If you're limited to paper, then that dichotomous key is about the only way you have to go. But wouldn't it be nice if we could just tell a computer, this is what I do know? And that's what they put together at the Burke Museum. And a lot of places have done this. I've actually been involved in an effort like this myself, but it takes a lot of work to put into a database a bunch of information. So when you get to the site, here it is, and we go to Plants of Washington Identification Key. All right, and it gives us little directions, but here we go. Now, this looks completely different, doesn't it? We're given a lot of choices, and we just click on the ones that apply. So let's start here with growth habit. Yeah, that was definitely a tree. Wow, you can see things changed already. We have 152 trees to choose from, so that whittles it down from, the over 3,000 in the state. Obviously not an annual perennial, or annual or biennial. All trees are perennial, so that doesn't really help. Leaf arrangement. Okay, these are some familiar terms. Opposite, alternate, world. And I'm just going to put it here and say, okay, I know it's not basal, and I know the leaves are not absent, but I'm not entirely sure. So I'm going to skip that one because otherwise I could narrow it down to the wrong ones. What about leaf type? Ooh, yeah, needle-like. That was definitely the case. Now I've narrowed it down even more. Flower color, it didn't have any flowers now that you mentioned that. And then flowering period, that's going to be difficult with no flowers. But where did I find that? That thing was at mid to low elevation in eastern Washington. That's what I know about the plant. The more you know, the better it's going to narrow it down for you, and then you're going to show the matches. Now, this doesn't always take you exactly to the right one, but I have 11 matching taxa, or groups. And when I scroll through these, now I can just look at the pictures and say, hey, what looks like mine? Is that it? That's possible. But you'd have to read a little more about it, maybe click on the link. Ponderosa pine, boy, that cone looks a whole lot like the one I was seeing before. Let's click on that. Now we have a whole bunch of information. Oh yeah, that's definitely it. Boom, I was right there in the state, so I was probably right around the same area. You could see more trees. Yeah, that red bark, that was definitely it. I can read a whole description. You always want to get that confirmation at the end. You don't just want to get to the end and say, hey, I reached a name, that must be it. I've done this for hours and hours and hours and hours and still make mistakes. And so it's kind of good to have that confirmation, look at a picture, a drawing, specimen to make sure you got it. But three different ways. Choose whatever is most appropriate in your situation.